November, and it is until the 18th of December. Um, and it will be given by our very own Central Employee Rep, John Porter. And he is a key part of the Central team. If you don't already know him, he's been working at BDP for 5 years. Um, John is actually a really, really good friend of mine. And last week we did a practice run, and I have to say that he is such an inspirational person. And I'm just I'm just in awe of all the achievements that he's sort of done throughout his life. I have learned so much from him and just listening to that talk. And it's kind of highlighted the fact that as a society, we don't really talk about these really important things. And we kind of need to continue the conversation, keep it going, talk about these important things. In his talk, he explains a bit about his experience with a disability, his challenges, and also his amazing achievements, which you will hear about shortly. This session is recorded, so please do share with everyone and anyone. I would highly recommend. And after John does his talk, there should be some time for a Q&A afterwards. If you wouldn't mind raising your hand or putting any questions in the chat, and I'll try to field them. But without further ado, I will hand over to John.
Well, I don't really know what to do with that intro. Thanks, mate. I feel like I've been given a lot to live up to now. But yeah, hello, everyone. I'm just going to quickly start the screen share. I do have a presentation. I promise it's not going to be death by PowerPoint. It's just largely for me to remember what I'm saying, because I have a habit of going off on tangents, as anybody who has met me or spoken to me will know. So let's get that started. Hopefully everyone can see that. I know I'm an IT person, but I'm off the clock at the moment. So if it doesn't work, I unfortunately can't help you until this talk's over. But I'll give it the best I can. So yeah, hello everyone. Welcome to So What's the Matter with Your Legs? I will explain that title shortly, but firstly, I'm just going to give you a little bit of an overview of myself and who I am. Some of you might know me already. I work in the central IT function at BDP. My name's John Porter, as I've already said. I was born in Preston, and now I live in Manchester. You can see, well, I've blurred my background to prevent you from seeing my laundry, but yeah, I live in Manchester. This is my flat that I'm in currently, and I suppose the key part of the bit today is that I was born and live with cerebral palsy. I'm 31 years old. It's been a part of my life for 31 years. So I called the talk, So What's the Matter with Your Legs? And the reason for that was because it's the best way that anyone's ever asked me about my disability. There's a lot of ways that people tend to ask this question. I think most people feel quite afraid of doing it. I've put some examples of some the other kind of questions that people ask there. No offense, but is definitely one of the biggest starters that I tend to get. I think it might be the worst used phrase in the English language, because I've never known a question that starts with no offence, but that has not then contained something offensive. The nicer ones are, do you mind if I ask? I do get that one quite a bit. And sometimes you start with, if people have seen me walking around the studio, I wear splints on my legs. So sometimes people have their opening gambit has been to ask about the things on my legs. But I've made a bit of a joke of the "so what's the matter with your legs" thing. It's actually said to me by a former BDP staff member. He wasn't sacked for that. He has left now. But he is actually now one of my best friends. And the reason for that is largely because of the fact that he asked me that question in that way. If there was one thing I would like somebody to take away from this, it would be, don't be afraid to ask questions. I want to be clear that when I do this talk, I'm not speaking for all disabled people or anything like that. I am speaking for myself, but I do think that most disabled people are quite open to talking about things, quite open to talking about their experiences, their conditions. At the end of the day, for me, it's part of my life. It always has been. It always will be. So I want the people that know me, the people that want to know me, to be able to ask the questions. So if there's a takeaway today, it's never be afraid to ask the questions that you need to ask. You know, part of BDP belonging and what we're doing is about trying to raise awareness, trying to, gain more understanding. I think asking questions is a great way to do that. And yeah, never be afraid to do so. So now I've said how people tend to question. I'll give you some answers as to what disability I suffer from. I have cerebral palsy, as I explained previously. It's largely a brain condition. It's actually defined as brain injury or damage, and it's usually suffered during the pregnancy or caused by a premature birth. You can see I was about 4 months premature. Sorry, 12. Yeah, 3, 4 months premature. You can actually see how small I was there in that photo. I think most people that have met me would agree that I didn't exactly remain that size, but yeah, that was me. I was a premature baby, and there are many forms of cerebral palsy. I've put three of them down there. I actually have the first one on the list, spastic cerebral palsy, which is related to muscle stiffness and weakness. Um, those of you that have seen me, you will see that I do struggle to get around. I also, the other word contained in my condition is a word called diplegia, which is actually a subtype of spastic cerebral palsy, in which the legs are most affected. It is very variable. I'm very fortunate, and I always think of myself as very fortunate to have the mobility that I do. I'm going to come on to stuff that I've been able to do despite all that in due course. But I think the key thing to take away is that it's not the same for everyone. Um, it can affect people in different ways. I know a number of people with cerebral palsy who have speech affected, who have sight affected, who have arms, problem with arm mobility and motor skills. I have some motor skills issues, but thankfully not enough to stop me operating a PC, despite what some people might think who've seen me do work. But yeah, I do consider myself very fortunate, but it is very variable in severity. There are other types of cerebral palsy. You can see them there. Some involve involuntary movements or tremors. I don't really get too much of that. I get a little bit, but it's quite a serious scenario in that stage. And also the final one, affecting balance and coordination. Well, I do have some issues with balance, but it is, in my case, it's largely related to muscular structure and the fact that my muscles aren't particularly strong in certain areas more than it is to do with the condition itself. Of course, any condition that varies, the severity varies, but also the challenges vary. Everybody kind of has their own experience. I think this is true of all disabilities. Everybody has their own experience, their own difficulties. I'm going to talk to you about some of mine. These may not be the same for everyone with cerebral palsy. They may not be the same for everyone with a disability. Cerebral palsy is, as I said, I've had it for 31 years. It's a lifelong condition. You are born with it. In most cases, it doesn't get diagnosed until essentially you're old enough for people to see that your mobility or muscular development is slowed. In my case, I was diagnosed when I was 2 years old. It's not considered a progressive condition in the sense that it doesn't worsen over time, but unfortunately, its impact on your body in terms of the strain it puts on you could be considered progressive in the sense that you can do certain things to improve it. I do exercise, I do swimming, I do all sorts of different things to try and get my muscles moving. But there's still a chance that as I get older, and obviously as your body declines anyway, that life can get harder. You kind of accept that for what it is. It's not considered a progressive condition, but I kind of wish it was, because the natural progression of life versus this condition does kind of make it more and more difficult. Um, as I pause to go onto the right screen, sorry about that. So, I mean, there's a number of challenges surrounding cerebral palsy and disability itself, really. But I think some of the key ones I've listed here and I wanted to talk about. Um, so the challenges really are largely around the unpredictability of it. Certainly the first two. I keep saying the word variability. That's not just true of people that have cerebral palsy. It's true of people that are living with cerebral palsy. There are days where I can get up and feel I can do almost anything, and there's days where I struggle to get out of bed. Things are different physically for me. I would say almost on a daily basis. There's times where things are a little bit more stable, but if, for instance, I've been doing something that's more physically strenuous, I'll start to struggle in the following days. I kind of have to work around that. And ditto for the second point, constant planning is a really key thing. I think when I showed May this talk, this was one thing that she pointed out she didn't really know, I hadn't really realised too much about, and it's not something that I would ever sort of visibly show to people, but pretty much anything I do involving being out in public life is planned to a certain extent because I have to plan for it. You know, things like how am I going to get to this place? What am I going to do when I have to stand in this queue? How am I going to get up these stairs? Where am I going to sit in this scenario? Can I walk that distance? These are all things that have to go through my head on a daily basis. What dangers could I face when I do something? You know, these are things that I have to think about. I have to say that in order to do some of the things I've done with my life, I've kind of had to throw those out and go, just what happens, happens. If something bad happens to me, that's the way it is. You know, I have to live with that. But the vast majority of my life now is certainly okay. I need to think about how I'm going to deal with this, even down to stupid small things like where we're going for a drink on Friday night. Sometimes it might be, can I walk down there? Do I need to get a cab? You know, how am I going to get home? Will I be able to get home? Is it pedestrian? These are all just stupid things that go through your head. You know, things you have to think about. And I'd say that's one of the biggest challenges, really, is just having to plan my life to a level that most people don't. I think about the COVID lockdowns and how we were allowed to go out to exercise, and most people, you know, were just taking off once a day to go for a walk into a distance and walk back again. That's not as easy for me because I can't say, oh, yeah, I'll go out and walk now and I'll come back. I don't know what distance I'm going to be capable of walking. Certainly after 6, 12 months of lockdown, I was barely capable of leaving the house. You know, these are things that normal people, I guess, don't have to deal with, but it is just something that particularly gets to me. And I guess the other things are more mental than anything else, but it kind of follows on from both of those things. Drive and motivation to do things is also very variable when you suffer from any form of disability, I think. Like I say, there are some days where you feel unbeatable. There's plenty of things that have happened to me, plenty of things that I've done where I felt great, and the following day I feel like I could do anything. But then as soon as you go into a bit of a difficult patch physically, you start to feel like, you know, what was once the simplest thing in the world to you is now one of the most difficult things you can face. And, you know, the challenge is, it is what it is. I know in belonging, we like to try and give a picture of equality and all these kind of things. And, you know, I think that's admirable. And I do think most of us probably, I think 90% of us probably feel viewed alongside others, and we don't consider our disability to make us different. But the fact is, we always are, and we always will be. It's how different, I guess, is the degree of what happens, how people treat you. Um, you know, how the, dare I say it, how the government treats you can be very different to how it would be for a standard person. You know, having that thought in your head that you're never quite going to be the same as, say, one of your friends, one of your peers, is quite a difficult thing to do. And there's always like a constant battle between a need for independence and a need to accept help. I consider myself to be an extremely independent disabled person. I characterize myself as violently independent. I think I wanted to be someone who could do things for themselves. That's why I live on my own now. I'm sitting, to be perfectly honest with you, I'll tell you a story. I was born, obviously, with this disability. When I was diagnosed, I was told straight that I would never walk independently and never be able to do things independently. I've since made a career out of arguing with medical professionals because I spent most of my time proving that wrong. I was determined to be um, independent. I was determined to do things. I went from being in a standing frame when I was 4 years old, which was swiftly removed from me when I started to misbehave with it and move backwards in it and such like, to being on sticks when I was maybe 5 or 6 years old, to being on one stick when I was 7 years old, to then being able to walk independently. Um, it's not something I try to crow about. I have a difficulty accepting compliments. I have a difficulty bigging myself up, but I do feel very proud that I did that. And it's kind of coloured my life. Everything I've done has been out of a drive to be independent. But equally, just because you're independent, sometimes you have to accept help. I'm fortunate to have a wonderful group of friends in this city since I moved here. Most of them are probably in this call. Most of them probably work at BDP, who have looked out for me a great deal. And sometimes it just takes someone to say to you, you know, if you need help in this situation, just ask. But it's very hard to shake that stigma and maybe that thought process of, I really don't want help in this situation. I want to prove I can do it. And yeah, I find that very difficult. I think that's a big challenge for any disabled person because your natural thought process is to try and be as, I hesitate to use the word normal, but to try and be as able-bodied as you can be. But sometimes your body just won't cooperate. And of course, in any situation where you're dealing with all this stuff, I will go to my grave saying that I think it has an impact on your mental health. Anytime you're dealing with something that makes you feel different from other people, makes you feel like you can't do things, or makes you feel like you might be being left out of things, all of which are a big part of have been a big part of my life growing up. It's going to leave a bit of a dent on your mental health, and it's going to make you quite an insecure person. I characterize myself as being very um, in need of reassurance as a human being. And I think a lot of that stems from always feeling like someone else, always feeling like a different person to them, always feeling like, sometimes feeling like a burden to people. Sometimes when it comes to um, organizing things, doing things, you can feel a bit like your presence is an issue. And you need some of the greatest people around you to fix that. I'm fortunate to say that that has happened to me, but it wasn't an easy process. Certainly, growing up from being a child through the teenage years, which are hard for anyone as it is, disability is a very difficult thing to deal with a bunch of judgmental teenagers around you. Um, so keep those in mind as a challenge. And in terms of being an ally, I mean, I've kind of said all of it anyway, but I think, if you are close to or want to ally for disabled people, it's about understanding. I can't expect you to understand exactly what goes through my head and what goes through my body every time I take a step. I can't show you, I can't demonstrate to you what every day is like. I can't demonstrate any of that. But I can give you an idea, and you can understand what you do understand and know what you don't know. I think is a big thing. Understand that when a disabled person is saying something to you that they can't do it, as much as sometimes they just need a little encouragement to get them over the hump, sometimes it is a case of they actually physically can't do it. And it's not just understanding that they can't do something, it's understanding why they can't do something or why they feel they can't do something. Um, and anybody in a disabled person's life needs to be prepared for that variability as well, of like something you could do on one day is suddenly very, very difficult to do. You know, I think a lot about my personal life, and I'm in some ways I said I was fortunate to be living alone during lockdown, and I think I probably was, because I would have drove anyone else crazy. But I think if it ever gets to a situation where I am living with someone or something like that, it needs to be someone understanding that some days are difficult, some days are dead easy, and to be honest, it drives me mad as much as it would drive someone else mad that like one day it's fine and the next day it isn't. So yeah, be prepared to give a lot of love, support, and reassurance, because trust me, the vast majority of disabled people I've met, and I include myself in this, fancy themselves as wonder people and will work their asses off, to be in a situation that they're happy with and proud of. But my God, do they need some help from others sometimes? I don't think anyone is an island, but I think that there's a trend sort of in today's world to focus on inspirational people and inspirational things, but the fact is you can't do any of it without support. So as much as you can give a disabled person, try and give it to them. And I think perhaps another key takeaway: realize that we are different, and I think the vast majority of us would accept that and say that, yeah, we are different, we understand that, but we don't always want to be different. Some days we just want to be the same as you. I think most days I wake up and I don't. I think now I'm in a position where I think to myself that um, I am largely treated as any other person would be by my friends, by people that I know, and that's the position that most of us want to be in. But I still want it understood that some things are different. I can't do certain things. Some things are hard. And I think it's a difficult thing to write down, and it's an even more difficult thing to carry out. But honestly, that's kind of what it is. You have to realize we're the same but different, to coin a phrase. It's a strange position to be in, but that is kind of how it is, unfortunately. So I mean, I've dealt with some pretty heavy stuff there, so I'm going to try and lighten the tone a bit now, because we like to end on an uplifting tone in these talks. And I said how difficult I've found some parts of life, and I have found it very difficult, but I've been fortunate to be able to do some incredible things and things that I really enjoyed. I've put some photos together here. I'll go through each of them in turn. The last one's probably worrying you, so I'll cover that in a second. When I was coached American football from when I was 18 to when I was 22. You can actually see me in there. I'm actually in the middle of the picture. Needless to say, I'm sat down. There, I felt very fortunate to do that. I love American football as a sport. I'll come on to a little bit more about it in a second, but I love American football as a sport. Clearly, athletics was never going to be my calling card in life, so I got the opportunity to coach a bunch of people in my age group. I had a hell of a time for 4 or 5 years, and it helped shape me as a more confident person. And I think I'm better off for it. And I think of those days with very, very happy memories. It was never My disability was never a barrier to that. I was as passionate and dedicated as anybody else, and I had a great time with it. Um, I've also took the opportunity to travel the world, and I kind of have to throw myself, I have to throw this story in here, but there was a point in my life, probably around 2014, 2015-ish, where I had to decide um, kind of where I wanted my life to go. Um, because when you're a disabled person, it's very easy to fall back on things. It's very easy to sort of just say, "Oh, I can't do this. I give up." And I've talked about that. It's not always easy. Sometimes you need reassurance, support, inspiration, maybe. Um, but I got to a stage where there was things I wanted to do with my life. There was adventures I wanted to have, and unless I took a risk, I wasn't going to be able to do it. And it started in 2014 with a random little trip to Bulgaria. I still can't explain that one. I went to Norway shortly afterwards as well. Can't really explain that one. But it was all building up to a trip I really wanted to take, and it's the first picture on the bottom line there, San Francisco. Um, the reason for that is, like I said, I've always been a fan of American football. I'm a San Francisco 49ers fan, go Niners. And I wanted more than anything to visit the US. I wanted more than anything to visit that city, and I wanted to visit the 49ers stadium and watch a game. And I started watching the NFL when I was 15 years old, and it felt a million miles away from where I could get to. And when I was 25, so roughly about 10 years later, I went over there for the first time, and I did it. And I'm finding it difficult to tell this story now because I can feel a little bit of emotion in my voice, but like I do vividly remember walking into the stadium that day, taking my seat, looking around the stadium for a second, and I'll be honest, I just started crying because it felt like a combination of a bunch of things that I always wanted to do, never thought I could. And to suddenly be in that situation, it was like I'd entered an alternate mindset. It was like I'd gone somewhere else, a different universe. This was a world that was never supposed to be available to me. As a person that was never supposed to be independent, never supposed to do all these things, that was a world that should have been a million miles away from me. And yeah, I look at that photo now and I realise it wasn't that far away at all. Um, and I went back 2 years later just to prove I could do it again. Just to prove it wasn't a one-off. I suppose I did it again 2 years later. I've had a great time both times I've been there. I absolutely love it. I've travelled to Germany and a few other countries as well. There are a few more on the list. There's another one there actually. That's a photo from the new camp in Barcelona. Those of you that know me relatively well will know I'm a Liverpool fan, so I was actually booing Philip Coutinho. But I got to see Lionel Messi play, and I got to see him score a hat trick in one of the greatest stadiums in the world. So that meant a hell of a lot to me as well. And the last two pictures are really just me having fun. The top right corner there is my surprise party for my 30th. You can probably see a fellow BDP employee on that photo if any of you know her. She often looks at me with that face of confusion. But that was a really nice moment. I remember posting around about my 30th on Instagram, as I am prone to do, um, the baby photo of me from earlier with a photo of me from my 30th, saying, this is me on my 30th birthday, and this is me about 30 minutes after I was born. I was never supposed to get here, and well, I did, and it was fun. I can't tell you that I remember a lot of that night, but nonetheless, that photo's there to remind me. And the very bottom is one of my favourite photos, actually my profile photo on Instagram. So there you go. I'm not bothered about how I come across on social media. That photo is actually taken from the front row of a punk rock gig. I'm big into my punk music. If anybody's out there listening and wondering what the hell's going on. But that's actually me at a standing gig in the front row on a chair. It's the least safe I've ever felt, but probably also the most alive I've ever felt as well. So those are some good times. I just wanted to share some of those because I know it was. I know some of the discussion was pretty heavy. I just wanted to talk about some of the cool things that, certainly some of the cool things I think I've done. Whether you think that is kind of up to you, but I'll leave that with you. Um, Also, I try not to make too much of a big deal out of this anymore, but I'm a stand-up comedian in my spare time. I'm from a very long line of disabled comics. Some of you might have actually seen Rosie Jones on television, who is also a comedian with cerebral palsy. I've actually gigged with her in the past. I'm very proud of that, to be honest with you. Stand-up was something for me that just allowed me to take control of my own life. I think it kind of fed into some of the other stuff I've just talked about. I wanted to own my disability. I started off stand up wanting to not talk about it, and then I realised how ridiculous that was. Anytime you're going up on stage and having to sit down in front of a couple of hundred people after somebody's had to basically drag you up the stairs to get on stage, it would be ridiculous not to talk about it. And I think me confronting that and my own awkwardness around the condition probably helped remove some of the audience's awkwardness and stigma around the condition as well. I do a lot of jokes about myself, and I do a lot of jokes about my condition in the in my stand-up sets. The thought process sometimes for some people is that I shouldn't do that, but the way I see it, it's something that's unique to me. It's unique to my story, and it's something that I want to own. I want to be able to say, yeah, you know what, I can talk about that. I can make jokes about that. This is my life. This is what I want. I wanted to have fun and I wanted to build confidence, and all of those things have happened to me. And sometimes when all that culminates together, it can end in a moment like this. I wanted to include this photo as it's probably my proudest moment. If you can't quite tell what's happening, I'm in the green shirt. The easy way to tell is the bent knee look. But yeah, this was a stand-up gig in, I think it was 2015, in front of roughly about 2,000 people was the estimate, in on a field in Cheshire, of all places. I was doing a stand-up set to 2,000 bikers, and that was how it ended. And I still think about that day whenever things are tough. Like I said, not every day is easy, not every day is nice, but I still think about those sorts of things when things aren't going too well. Like I say, I think it's my proudest moment, and I'm not really one for. I talked before about this sort of inspirational culture and inspirational quotes. I'm not really one for that kind of stuff. I don't really like those sorts of things. I think you can only find inspiration in yourself, and I think you can only really find it when you're ready to find it. For me, it took a long time to finish that journey, to feel like I wanted to do things like this again. But I included this quote because I think it's from a book. It wasn't a particularly good book, but I just like the quote. As terrifying and painful as reality can be, it's also the only place where you can find true happiness. Well, all those things are true because some days life is terrifying, and most days life is painful. But I'm very happy to live in reality, and between that and all the other things I've done, as well as finding out that I could be independent, I could do all these things, I think I also found true happiness, and I'm very happy about that. That's me done. I think we're going back to May now for Q&A, possibly. I don't know what May's got lined up for me, so I'll just quietly end this, and then we'll see what you've got, May. What have you got for us?
Firstly, I just wanted to say thank you on behalf of everyone for sharing that story. It was even listening to it a second time round, it was just as impactful. So thank you so much. If anyone has any kind of questions that they wanted to put to John, please feel free to raise your hand or pop it in the chat. But I guess just to start off with, how has it been for you to put this presentation together? Have you sort of learned anything, about yourself a bit more, putting together, like a formal presentation? It kind of, yeah, any thoughts?
Honestly, it was kind of a voyage of discovery for me. I like some of the stuff around my condition. I didn't really know all that well. Obviously, when you're growing up with it as a child, it's not something you're exposed to. I think my parents did the best to, I guess, protect me from the reality of what I was facing. So I've sort of only really started to learn about it as I've become an adult, and some of this stuff for this presentation, it was like, wow, I really have been dealing with that for so many years. Wow, yeah, that's actually a really good point. Yeah, it is degenerative in the sense that like your body does start to wear it. You know, it was a really nice thing to do in terms of like making me more comfortable with what I've been dealing with. Um, yeah, real voyage of discovery for me, a massive thing, I would say.
Definitely. And I think someone has said it's great insight into the quiet things that no one ever knows. And I think that's an absolute classic. You know, it's something that we don't talk about, but it's so important to understand. I feel like I understand you so much more. And in certain situations, I feel like I might be able to, you know, approach it in a more informed way and stuff. So it's just wonderful. Um,
Yeah, if I could just say something on that as well, I think for me this is stuff that like there are a lot of people. I'm just looking at the participant list now. There are a lot of people in this meeting who are very good friends of mine and know me quite well and know quite a bit about the way that my life is. And but there are certain things in here that I've probably never shared with anyone, and it's yeah. It's hard to talk about those things, but if you don't, people don't know. I've discovered as I've got older, and there's no I'm working on a new stand-up show at the moment, which I'm going to title "Shame is Overrated," and I think that's probably the way to look at it. Like, I don't need to feel ashamed of this. This is who I am. You know, this is who I should be. So, yeah, it's good to give people insight into those things, is what I would say.
Definitely. And it sort of ties back to what you said about owning it. And I just love that title. So yeah, once you have any dates for that show, I'm sure people would love to know if they can attend. Um, okay, I have another question for you. So with working from home and flexible working policies that different sort of companies are now adopting, I think a lot of people are looking at how they can change their environments to make it more flexible. And I just wondered if you had any sort of tips or suggestions for um, designers to consider to sort of help you or make it more of a nicer environment to be in.
It's probably more of a general answer because I think every space is different, and there are certain I'm fully accepting that there are certain things you can't do about certain spaces. I think about the Albert Hall in town, which is a gig venue I absolutely love to go to, but the disability section is up 4 flights of stairs. Now, I've never understood that, but it's a listed building. There's nothing they can do. So there are certain things that I think it's a listed building. I could be wrong. I'm not an architect, just to make that clear. You know, I know there are reasons why certain buildings can't be adapted, certain spaces can't be adapted. The thing I would say is, I think there's a lot of assumptions made about disability by people that aren't disabled, and I think that's probably the thing that causes some of these issues. There's very few. I don't know this to be definite, but I don't think there's very many disabled voices in the profession, and I think it does sometimes show in design. Not being critical as such, it's just a fact of life. If you don't have those voices in the room, then you're not going to get that that out of it. In terms of in terms of like flexible working and stuff, just I can only speak for myself, but I'm certainly one of those people that likes to be in one place and know which place I'm going to and have things set up for me to work
Mm.
on, you know. But equally in casual spaces, I would like to outlaw benching because it is physically impossible for me to get into. I realise that I can't do that, but it's those sort of things. It can sometimes you can make a space restrictive without realising you've done it, I guess.
Mm. No, those are definitely good points because I know that in Manchester we're looking at how we could, you know, offer different working spaces or keep more personal spaces, like you just pointed out. Um, yeah, so that's wonderful. And I guess sort of to round up the sort of talk, I haven't seen any more questions. So if anyone is thinking of any, please pop them in the chat. But if not, I just thought it could be a nice one to end on. And just wondered what your next big adventure is on your bucket list and what you're sort of aiming to do over the next few years.
Well, we all know that obviously the thing we don't talk about and the words we don't say out loud for the last year or so has affected pretty much every plan that we've all had. I wanted to do a lot around my 30th. After my 30th, of course, it ended up being that my 30th was pretty much the last social event before lockdown. So I don't know if I was responsible, but yeah, I have a lot of things in the itinerary. There's places I still want to visit. A lot of them are based around sport. I love sports. Some are based around music as well. I'd quite like to visit. I'm going to throw one out there for anybody that builds football stadiums in this meeting. I want to go to Dortmund to see Dortmund play and be in the yellow wall. Now I'm not sure if that's a standing section, so that may still be out of the equation. But I would still like to have a go and see how it goes. But there's a number of places on my list. I actually did a travel list during lockdown, so going to see how many of those I can tick off in the next few years, BDP permitted, of course.
Wonderful. Well, thanks so much. I will stop the recording now, and I think we will